Something had to be done. Jerry Muskrat said so. Grandfather Frog said so. Billy Mink said so. Little Joe Otter said so. Even Spotty the Turtle said so. The Laughing Brook couldn't laugh, and the Smiling Pool couldn't smile. You see, there wasn't water enough in either of them to laugh or smile, and nobody knew if there ever would be again. Nobody had ever known anything like it before, and so nobody knew what to think or do. And yet they all felt that something must be done. "What do you think, Billy Mink?" asked Grandfather Frog. Billy Mink looked down from the top of the big rock into the little pool of water that was all was left of the Smiling Pool. He could see a dozen fat trout in it, and he knew that he could catch them just as easily as not, because there was no place for them to swim away from him. But somehow he didn't want to catch them. He knew that they were frightened almost to death already by the running away of nearly all the water from the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool, and somehow he felt sorry for them. "I think that the best thing we can do is to move down to the Big River. I've been down there, and that's all right," said Billy Mink. "That's what I think," said Little Joe Otter. "There's no danger that the Big River will go dry." "How do you know?" asked Jerry Muskrat. "The Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool never went dry before." "It's a long, long way down to the Big River," broke in Spotty the Turtle, who travels very, very slowly and carries his house with him. "Chug-a-rum! I, for one, don't want to leave the Smiling Pool without finding out what the trouble is." "There's nothing happens, as you know, but has a cause to make it so." Now there must be some cause, some reason for this terrible trouble with the Smiling Pool, and if we can find that out, perhaps we shall know better what to do, said Grandfather Frog. Jerry Muskrat nodded his head. "Grandfather Frog is right," said he. "Of course, there must be a cause, but where are we to look for it? I've been all over the Smiling Pool, and I'm sure it isn't there." Grandfather Frog actually smiled. "Chug-a-rum," said he. "Of course, the cause of all the trouble isn't in the Smiling Pool. Anyone would know that." "Well, if you know so much, tell us where it is then," snapped Jerry Muskrat. "In the Laughing Brook, of course," replied Grandfather Frog. "No such thing," said Billy Mink. "I've been all the way down the Laughing Brook to the Big River, and I didn't find a thing." "Have you been all the way up the Laughing Brook to the place it starts from?" asked Grandfather Frog. "No," replied Billy Mink. "Well, that's where the cause of all the trouble is," said Grandfather Frog, just as if he knew all about it. "It's the water that comes down the Laughing Brook that makes the Smiling Pool, and the Smiling Pool never could dry up if the Laughing Brook didn't first stop running." "That's so! I never had thought of that," cried Little Joe Otter. "I tell you what, Billy Mink and I will go way up the Laughing Brook and see what we can find." "Chug-a-rum!" "Let us all go," said Grandfather Frog. Then the five put their heads together and decided that they would go up the Laughing Brook to hunt for the trouble.
Old Mr. Buzzard, sailing high in the blue, blue sky, looked down on a funny sight. Yes, sir, it certainly was a funny sight. It was a little procession of 5 of his friends of the Smiling Pool. First was Billy Mink, who, because he is slim and nimble, moves so quickly it sometimes is hard to follow him. Behind him was Little Joe Otter, whose legs are so short that he almost looks as if he hadn't any. Behind Little Joe was Jerry Muskrat, who is a better traveler in the water than on land. Behind Jerry was Grandfather Frog, who neither walks nor runs, but travels with great jumps. Last of all was Spotty the Turtle, who travels very, very slowly because, he carries his house with him. And all five were headed up the Laughing Brook, which laughed no more because there was not water enough in it. Now, old Mr. Buzzard hadn't been over near the Smiling Pool for some time, and he hadn't heard how the Smiling Pool had stopped smiling, and the Laughing Brook had stopped laughing. When he looked down and saw how the water was so nearly gone from them that the trout and the minnows had hardly enough in which to live, he was so surprised that he kept saying over and over to himself, "For the land's sake! For the land's sake!" Then, when he saw his 5 little friends marching up the Laughing Brook, he guessed right away that it must be something to do with the trouble in the Smiling Pool. Old Mr. Buzzard just turned his broad wings and slid down out of the blue, blue sky until he was right over Grandfather Frog. "Where y'all's going?" asked old Mr. Buzzard.
"Chug-a-rum, to find out what is the trouble with the Laughing Brook," replied Grandfather Frog.
"I'll help you," said old Mr. Buzzard, once more sailing up in the blue, blue sky. Grandfather Frog watched him until he was nothing but a speck.
"I wish I had wings,"
sighed Grandfather Frog, and once more began to hop along the bed of the Laughing Brook. The Laughing Brook came down from the green forest and wound through the green meadows for a little way before it reached the Smiling Pool. There the sun shone down into it, and Grandfather Frog didn't mind, although his legs were getting tired. But when they got into the green forest, it was dark and gloomy. At least Grandfather Frog thought so, and so did Spotty the Turtle, for both dearly loved the sunshine. But still they kept on, for they felt that they must find the trouble with the Laughing Brook. If they found this, they would also find the trouble with the Smiling Pool. So Billy Mink jumped and skipped far ahead. Little Joe Otter ran. Jerry Muskrat walked, for he soon gets tired on land. Grandfather Frog hopped. Spotty the Turtle crawled, and way, way up in the blue, blue sky, old Mr. Buzzard flew, all looking for the trouble which had stopped the laughing of the Laughing Brook and the smiling of the Smiling Pool. "Wait for me!" cried Little Joe Otter to Billy Mink, but Billy Mink was in too much of a hurry and just ran faster. "Wait for me!" cried Jerry Muskrat to Little Joe Otter, but Little Joe was in too much of a hurry and just ran faster.
"Wait for me!"
cried Grandfather Frog to Jerry Muskrat, but Jerry was in too much of a hurry and just walked faster.
"Wait for me!"
cried Spotty the Turtle to Grandfather Frog, but Grandfather Frog was in too much of a hurry and just jumped faster. So running and walking and jumping and crawling, Billy Mink, Little Joe Otter, Jerry Muskrat, Grandfather Frog, and Spotty the Turtle hurried up the Laughing Brook to find out why it laughed no more. And high overhead in the blue, blue sky sailed old Mr. Buzzard, and he was also looking for the trouble that had taken away the laugh from the Laughing Brook and the smile from the Smiling Pool. Now, old Mr. Buzzard's eyes are very sharp, and looking down from way up in the blue, blue sky, he can see a great deal. Indeed, old Mr. Buzzard can see all that is going on below on the green meadows and in the green forest. His wings are very broad, and he can sail through the air very swiftly when he makes up his mind to. Now, as he looked down, he saw that Billy Mink was selfish and wouldn't wait for Little Joe Otter. And Little Joe Otter was selfish and wouldn't wait for Jerry Muskrat. And Jerry Muskrat was selfish and wouldn't wait for Grandfather Frog. And Grandfather Frog was selfish and wouldn't wait for Spotty the Turtle.
I reckon I will hurry up right smart and find out what the trouble is myself, and then go back and tell Brer Turtle. It will save him a powerful lot of work, and it will serve Brer Mink right if Brer Turtle finds out first what is the trouble with the Laughing Brook,"
said old Mr. Buzzard, and shot far ahead over the Green Forest towards that part of it from which the Laughing Brook comes. In a few minutes he was as far ahead of Billy Mink as Billy was ahead of Spotty the Turtle. For wings are swifter far than legs, on whatsoever purpose bent, but doubly swift and tireless those wings on kindly deed intent. And this is how it happened that old Mr. Buzzard was the first to find out what it was that had stopped the laughing of the Laughing Brook and the smiling of the Smiling Pool. But he was so surprised when he did find out that he forgot all about going back to tell Spotty the Turtle. He forgot everything but his own great surprise, and he blinked his eyes a great many times to make sure that he wasn't dreaming. Then he sailed around and around in circles, looking down among the trees of the Green Forest and saying over and over to himself, "Did you ever? No, I never. Did you ever? No, I never." One step, 2 steps, 3 steps, so 4 steps, 5 steps, 6 steps, go. Keep right on and do your best. Mayhap you'll win while others rest. Spotty the Turtle said this over to himself every time he felt a little downhearted as he plodded along the bed of the Laughing Brook. And every time he said it, he felt better. 1 step, 2 steps, he kept saying over and over, and each time he said it, he took a step and then another. They were very short steps indeed, for Spotty's legs are very short. But each one carried him forward just so much, and he knew that he was just so much nearer the thing he was seeking. Anyway, he hoped he was. You see, if the Laughing Brook would never laugh anymore, and the Smiling Pool would never smile anymore, there was nothing to do but to go down to the big river to live, and no one wanted to do that, especially Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle. Now, because Billy Mink could go faster than Little Joe Otter, and Little Joe Otter could go faster than Jerry Muskrat, and Jerry could go faster than Grandfather Frog, and Grandfather Frog could go faster than Spotty the Turtle, and because each one wanted to be the first to find the trouble, no one would wait for the one behind him. So Spotty the Turtle, who has to carry his house with him, was a long, long way behind the others, but he kept right on going. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, so, and he didn't stop for anything. He crawled over sticks and around big stones, and sometimes when he found a little pool of water, he swam. He always felt better then, because he can swim faster than he can walk. After a long, long time, Spotty the Turtle came to a little pool where the sunshine lay warm and inviting. There in the middle of it, on a mossy stone, sat Grandfather Frog fast asleep. He had thought that he was so far ahead of Spotty that he could safely rest his tired legs. Spotty wanted to climb right up beside him and take a nap too, but he didn't. He just grinned and kept right on going. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, so, while Grandfather Frog slept on. By and by, after a long, long time, Spotty came to another little pool, and who should he see but Jerry Muskrat, busily opening and eating some freshwater clams which he had found there. He was so busy enjoying himself that he didn't see Spotty, and Spotty didn't say a word, but kept right on going, although the sight of Jerry's feast had made him dreadfully hungry. By and by, after a long, long time, he came to a third little pool with a high, smooth bank, and who should he see there but Little Joe Otter, who had made a slippery slide down the smooth bank and was having a glorious time sliding down into the little pool. Spotty would have liked to take just one slide, but he didn't. He didn't even let Little Joe Otter see him, but he kept right on going. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, so. By and by, after a long, long time, he came to a hollow log, and just happening to peep in, he saw someone curled up fast asleep. Who was it? Why, Billy Mink, to be sure. You see, Billy thought that he was so far ahead that he might just as well take it easy, and that was what he was doing. Spotty the Turtle didn't waken him. He just kept right on going the same slow way he had come all day, and so just as jolly, round, red Mr. Sun was going to bed behind the purple hills, Spotty the Turtle found the cause of the trouble in the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool. Spotty the Turtle stared and stared and stared until it seemed as if his eyes surely would pop out of his funny little head. Of course, he could believe his own eyes, and yet, well, if anybody else had seen what he was looking at and had told him about it, he wouldn't have believed it. No, sir, he wouldn't have believed it. You see, he couldn't have believed it because it didn't seem as if it could be really and truly so. He wondered if the sun shining in his eyes made him think he saw more than he really did see. So he carefully changed his position. It made no difference. Then Spotty was sure that what he saw was real and that he had found the cause of the trouble in the Laughing Brook, which had made it stop laughing and the Smiling Pool stop smiling. Spotty the Turtle was feeling pretty good. In fact, Spotty was feeling very good indeed because he had been the first to find out what was the matter with the Laughing Brook. At least he thought that he was the first, and he was of all the little people who live in the Smiling Pool. Only old Mr. Buzzard had been before him, and he didn't count because his wings are broad, and all he had to do was to sail over the green forest and look down. The ones who really counted were Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter and Jerry Muskrat and Grandfather Frog. Billy Mink had stopped for a nap. Little Joe Otter had stopped to play. Jerry Muskrat had stopped to eat. Grandfather Frog had stopped for a sun nap. But Spotty the Turtle had kept right on going, and now here he was, the first one to find the cause of the trouble in the Laughing Brook. Do you wonder that he felt proud and very happy? Keeping at it, that's the way Spotty won the race that day. But now Spotty was beginning to wish that some of the others would hurry up. He wanted to know what they thought. He wanted to talk it all over. It was such a surprising thing that he could make neither head nor tail of it himself, and he wondered what the others would say. And now the long black shadows were creeping through the green forest, and if they didn't get there pretty soon, they would have to wait until the next day. So Spotty the Turtle found a good place to spend the night, and then he sat down to watch and wait. Right before him was the thing which he had found and which puzzled him so. What was it? Why, it was a wall. Yes, sir, that is just what it was, a wall of logs and sticks and mud, and it was right across the Laughing Brook, where the banks were steep and narrow. Of course the Laughing Brook could laugh no longer. There couldn't enough water get through that wall of logs and sticks and mud to make even the beginning of a laugh. Spotty wondered what lay behind that wall, and who had built it, and what for, and a lot of other things. And he was still wondering when he fell asleep. Spotty the Turtle was awake by the time the first rays of the rising sun began to creep through the green forest. He was far, far up the Laughing Brook, very much farther than he had ever been before, and as he yawned and stretched, he wondered if, after all, he hadn't dreamed about the wall of logs and sticks and mud across the Laughing Brook. When he had rubbed the last sleepy wink out of his eyes, he looked again. There it was, just as he had seen it the night before. Then Spotty knew that it was real, and he began to wonder what was on the other side of it. "I cannot climb it, for my legs were never made for climbing," said Spotty mournfully as he looked at his funny little black feet. "Oh dear, I wish that I could climb like Happy Jack Squirrel." Just then a thought popped into his head and chased away the little frown that had crept into Spotty's face. "Perhaps Happy Jack sometimes wishes that he could swim as I can. So I guess we are even. I can't climb, but he can't swim. How foolish it is to wish for things never meant for you." And with that, all the discontent left Spotty the Turtle, and he began to study how he could make the most of his short legs and his perseverance, of which, as you already know, he had a great deal. He looked this way and he looked that way, and he saw that if he could climb to the top of the bank on one side of the Laughing Brook, he would be able to walk right out on the strange wall of logs and sticks and mud, and then, of course, he could see just what was on the other side. So Spotty the Turtle wasted no more time wishing that he could do something it was never meant that he should do. Instead, he picked out what looked like the easiest place to climb the bank and started up. My, it was hard work. You see, he had to carry his house along with him, for he has to carry that wherever he goes, and it would have been hard enough to have climbed that bank without carrying anything. Every time he had climbed up 3 steps, he slipped back 2 steps, but he kept at it, puffing and blowing, saying over and over to himself, "I can if I will, and will if I can. I'm sure to get there if I follow this plan." Halfway up the bank, Spotty lost his balance, and the house he was carrying just tipped him right over backward, and down he rolled to the place he had started from. "I needed to cool off," said Spotty to himself, and slid into a little pool of water. Then he tried the bank again, and just as before, he slipped back 2 steps for every 3 he went up. But he shut his mouth tight and kept at it, and by he was up to the place from which he had tumbled. There he stopped to get his breath. "I can if I will, and will if I can. I'm sure to get there if I follow this plan," said he, and started on again. Twice more he tumbled clear down to the place he had started from, but each time he laughed at himself and tried again, and at last he reached the top of the bank. "I said I could if I would, and I would if I could, and I have," he cried. Then he hurried to see what was behind the strange wall. What do you think it was? Why, a pond! Yes, sir, there was a pond right in the middle of the green forest. Trees were coming up right out of the middle of it, but it was a sure enough pond. Spotty found it harder work to believe his own eyes now than when he had first seen the strange wall across the Laughing Brook. "Why, what does it mean?" exclaimed Spotty the Turtle.
"That's what I want to know,"
cried Billy Mink, who came hurrying up just then. Who had made the strange pond? That is what Spotty the Turtle wanted to know. That is what Billy Mink wanted to know. So did Little Joe Otter and Jerry Muskrat and Grandfather Frog when they arrived. So did old Mr. Buzzard, looking down from the blue, blue sky. It was very strange indeed. Never had there been a pond in that part of the Green Forest before, not even in the days when Sister South Wind melted the snow so fast that the Laughing Brook ran over its banks and the Smiling Pool grew twice as large as it ought to be. Of course, someone had made it. Spotty the Turtle had known that as soon as he had seen the strange pond. All in a flash, he had understood what that wall of logs and brush and mud across the Laughing Brook was for. It was to stop the water from running down the Laughing Brook. And of course, if the water couldn't keep on running and laughing on its way to the Smiling Pool, it would just stand still and grow into a pond. Of course! There was nothing else for it to do. Spotty felt very proud when he had thought that out all by himself. "This wall we are sitting on has made the pond," said Spotty the Turtle after a long time in which no one had spoken.
"You don't say so," said Billy Mink. "However ever did you guess it? Are you sure, quite sure, that the pond didn't make the wall?"
Spotty knew that Billy Mink was making fun of him, but he is too good-natured to lose his temper over a little thing like that. He tried to think of something smart to say in reply, but Spotty is a slow thinker as well as a slow walker, and before he could think of anything, Billy was talking once more.
"This wall is what Farmer Brown's boy calls a dam," said Billy Mink, who was a great traveler. "Dams are usually built to keep water from running where it isn't wanted, or to make it go where it is wanted. Now what I want to know is, who under the sun wants a pond way back here in the Green Forest, and what is it for? Who do you think built this dam, Grandfather Frog?"
Grandfather Frog shook his head. His big goggly eyes seemed more goggly than ever as he stared at the new pond in the Green Forest.
"I don't know," said Grandfather Frog. "I don't know what to think."
"Why, it must be Farmer Brown's boy or Farmer Brown himself," said Jerry Muskrat. "Of course," said Little Joe Otter, just as if he knew all about it. Still, Grandfather Frog shook his head as if he didn't agree.
"I don't know," said Grandfather Frog. "I don't know. It doesn't look so to me."
Billy Mink ran along the top of the dam and down the backside. He looked it over with those sharp little eyes of his.
"Grandfather Frog is right," said he when he came back. "It doesn't look like the work of Farmer Brown or Farmer Brown's boy. But if they didn't do it, who did? Who could have done it?"
"I don't know," said Grandfather Frog again, in a dreamy sort of voice. Spotty the Turtle looked at him and saw that Grandfather Frog's face wore the faraway look that it always does when he tells a story of the days when the world was young.
"I don't know," he repeated, "but it looks to me very much like the work of—"
Grandfather Frog stopped short off and turned to Jerry Muskrat.
Jerry Muskrat, said he so sharply that Jerry nearly lost his balance in his surprise. Has your big cousin come down from the north?
Fiddle, faddle, feedle, fuddle. Was there ever such a muddle? Fuddle, feedle, faddle, fiddle. Who is there will solve the riddle? Here was the laughing brook, laughing no longer. Here was the smiling pool, smiling no longer. Here was a brand new pond deep in the green forest. Here was a wall of logs and bushes and mud called a dam, built by someone whom nobody had seen. And here was Grandfather Frog asking Jerry Muskrat if his big cousin had come down from the north, when Jerry didn't even know that he had a big cousin. I haven't any big cousin, said Jerry, when he had quite recovered from his surprise at Grandfather Frog's question.
Chug-a-rum,
exclaimed Grandfather Frog, and the scornful way in which he said it made Jerry Muskrat feel very small.
Chug-a-rum, of course you've got a big cousin in the north. Do you mean to tell me you don't know that, Jerry Muskrat?
Jerry had to admit that it was true that he didn't know anything about that big cousin. If Grandfather Frog said that he had one, it must be so, for Grandfather Frog is very old and very wise, and he knows a great deal. Still, it was very hard for Jerry to believe that he had a big cousin of whom he had never heard. Did you ever see him, Grandfather Frog? Jerry asked.
No, snapped Grandfather Frog. I never did. But I know all about him. He is a great worker, is this big cousin of yours, and he builds dams like this one we are sitting on.
I don't believe it, cried Billy Mink. I don't believe any cousin of Jerry Muskrat's ever built such a dam as this. Why, just look at that great tree trunk at the bottom. No one but Farmer Brown or Farmer Brown's boy could ever have dragged that there. You're crazy, Grandfather Frog, just plain crazy. Billy Mink sometimes is very disrespectful to Grandfather Frog.
Chug-a-rum, replied Grandfather Frog. I'm pretty old, but I'm not too old to learn, as some folks seem to be.
And he looked very hard at Billy Mink.
Did I say that tree trunk was dragged here?
No, replied Billy Mink. But if it wasn't dragged here, how did it get here? You are so smart, Grandfather Frog. Tell me that. Grandfather Frog blinked his great goggly eyes at Billy Mink as he said, just as if he was very, very sorry for Billy,
Your eyes are very bright and very sharp, Billy Mink, and it is a great pity that you have never learned how to use them. That tree wasn't dragged here. It was cut so that it fell right where it lies.
As he spoke, Grandfather Frog pointed to the stump of the tree, and Billy Mink saw that he was right. But Billy Mink is like a great many other people. He dearly loves to have the last word. Now he suddenly began to laugh.
Ha, 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 ho, ho, ho,
laughed Billy Mink.
Ho, 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 ha, ha, ha. What is it that is so funny?
Snapped Grandfather Frog, for nothing makes him so angry as to be laughed at. Do you mean to say that anybody but Farmer Brown or Farmer Brown's boy could have cut down such a big tree as that? Asked Billy. Why, that would be as hard as to drag the tree here.
Jerry Muskrat's big cousin from the north could do it, and I believe he did, replied Grandfather Frog. Now that we have found the cause of the trouble in the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool, what are we going to do about it?
There was the strange pond in the green forest, and there was the dam of logs and sticks and mud which had made the strange pond. But look as they would, Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter and Jerry Muskrat and Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle could see nothing of the one who had built the dam. It was very queer. The more they thought about it, the queerer it seemed. They looked this way and they looked that way.
There is one thing very sure, and that is that whoever built this dam had no thought for those who live in the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool, said Grandfather Frog. They are selfish, just plain everyday selfish. That's what they are. Now the Laughing Brook cannot laugh, and the Smiling Pool cannot smile, while this dam stops the water from running, and so—"
Grandfather Frog stopped and looked around at his 4 friends.
"And so what?"
cried Billy Mink impatiently.
"And so we must spoil this dam. We must make a place for the water to run through,"
said Grandfather Frog very gravely.
"Of course, that's the very
thing!" cried Little Joe Otter and Billy Mink and Jerry Muskrat and Spotty the Turtle. Then Little Joe Otter looked at Billy Mink, and Billy Mink looked at Jerry Muskrat, and Jerry Muskrat looked at Spotty the Turtle, and after that they all looked very hard at Grandfather Frog, and all together they asked, "How are we going to do it?" Grandfather Frog scratched his head thoughtfully and looked a long time at the dam of logs and sticks and mud. Then his big mouth widened in a big smile.
"Why, that is very simple," said he. "Jerry Muskrat will make a big hole through the dam near the bottom because he knows how, and the rest of us will keep watch to see that no harm comes near."
"The very thing!" cried Little Joe Otter and Billy Mink and Spotty the Turtle. But Jerry Muskrat thought it wasn't fair. You see, it gave him all of the real work to do. However, Jerry thought of his dear Smiling Pool and how terrible it would be if it should smile no more. And so without another word, he set to work. Now, Jerry Muskrat is a great worker, and he had made many long tunnels into the bank around the Smiling Pool, so he had no doubt but that he could soon make a hole through this dam. But almost right away he found trouble. Yes, sir, Jerry had hardly begun before he found real trouble. You see, that dam was made mostly of sticks instead of mud. And so instead of digging his way in as he would have done into the bank of the Smiling Pool, he had to stop every few minutes to gnaw off sticks that were in the way. It was hard work, the hardest kind of hard work. But Jerry Muskrat is the kind that is more determined to do work the harder the work is to be done. And so while Grandfather Frog sat at one end of the dam and pretended to keep watch, but really took a nap in the warm sunshine, while Spotty the Turtle sat on the other end of the dam doing the same thing, and while Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter swam around in the strange pond and enjoyed themselves, Jerry Muskrat worked and worked and worked. And just as jolly, round, red Mr. Sun started down behind the purple hills, Jerry broke through into the strange pond, and the water began to run in the Laughing Brook once more. There's nothing in this world that's sure, no matter how we scheme and plan. We simply have to be content with doing just the best we can. Jerry Muskrat had curled himself up for the night, so tired that he could hardly keep his eyes open long enough to find a comfortable place to sleep. But he was happy. Yes, indeed, Jerry was happy. He could hear the Laughing Brook beginning to laugh again. It was just a little low, gurgling laugh, but Jerry knew that in a little while it would grow into the full laugh that makes music through the green forest and puts happiness into the hearts of all who hear it. So Jerry was happy, for was it not because of him that the Laughing Brook was beginning to laugh? He had worked all the long day to make a hole through the dam which someone had built across the Laughing Brook and so stopped its laughter. Now the water was running again, and soon the new, strange pond behind the dam there in the green forest would be gone, and the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool would be their own beautiful selves once more. It was because he had worked so hard all day that he was going to sleep now. Usually he would rather sleep a part of the day and be abroad at night. Very pleasant dreams had Jerry Muskrat that night. Dreams of the dear Smiling Pool, smiling just as it had as long as Jerry could remember before this trouble had come. He was still dreaming when Spotty the Turtle found him and waked him, for it was broad daylight. Jerry yawned and stretched, and then he lay still for a minute to listen to the pleasant murmur of the Laughing Brook. But there wasn't any pleasant murmur. There wasn't any sound at all. Jerry began to wonder if he really was awake after all. He looked at Spotty the Turtle, and he knew that he was, for Spotty's face had such a worried look. "Get up, Jerry Muskrat, and come look at the hole you made yesterday in the dam. You couldn't have done your work very well, for the hole has filled up so that the water does not run any more," said Spotty. "I did do it well," snapped Jerry crossly. "I did it just as well as I know how. You lazy folks who just sit and take sun naps while you pretend to keep watch had better get busy and do a little work yourselves if you don't like the way I work." I beg your pardon, Jerry Muskrat. I didn't mean to say just that," replied Spotty. You see, we are all worried. We thought last night that by this morning the Laughing Brook would be full of water again, and we could go back to the Smiling Pool as soon as we felt like it, and here it is, as bad as ever. "Perhaps the trouble is just that some sticks and grass drifted down in the water and filled up the hole I made. That must be the trouble," said Jerry hopefully as he hurried towards the dam. First he carefully examined it from the Laughing Brook side. Then he dived down under water on the other side. He was gone a long time, and Billy Mink was just getting ready to dive to see what had become of him when he came up again. "What is the trouble?" cried Spotty the Turtle and Grandfather Frog and Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter together. "Is the hole filled up with stuff that has drifted in?" Jerry shook his head as he slowly climbed out of the water. "No," said he. "No, it isn't filled with drift stuff brought down by the water. It is filled with sticks and mud that somebody has put there. Somebody has filled up the hole that I worked so hard to make yesterday, and it will take me all day to open it up again." Then Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle and Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter and Jerry Muskrat stared at one another, and for a long time no one said a word. The way in which to find things out and what goes on all round about is just to keep my 2 eyes peeled and 2 ears all the time unsealed. So said Jerry Muskrat as he settled himself comfortably on one end of the new dam across the Laughing Brook deep in the green forest and watched the dark shadows creep farther and farther out into the strange pond made by the new dam. I'm going to find out who it is that built this dam and who it is that filled the hole I made in it. I'm going to find out if I have to move up here and live all summer. The way in which Jerry said this and snapped his teeth together showed that he meant just what he said. You see, Jerry had spent another long, weary day opening the hole in the dam once more, only to have it closed again while he slept. That had been enough for Jerry. He hadn't tried again. Instead, he had made up his mind that he would find out who was playing such a trick on him. He would just watch until they came, and then, if they were not bigger than he, or there were not too many of them, he would, well, the way Jerry gritted and clashed those sharp teeth of his sounded as if he meant to do something pretty bad. Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter had given up in disgust and started for the big river. They are great travelers anyway, and so didn't mind so much because there was no longer water enough in the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool. Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle, who are such very, very slow travelers, had decided that the big river was too far away, and so they would stay and live in the strange pond for a while, though it wasn't nearly so nice as their dear Smiling Pool. They had gone to sleep now, each in his own secret place where he would be safe for the night. So Jerry Muskrat sat alone and watched. The black shadows crept farther and farther across the pond and grew blacker and blacker. Jerry didn't mind this because, as you know, his eyes are made for seeing in the dark, and he dearly loves the night. Jerry had sat there a long time without moving. He was listening and watching. By and by, he saw something that made him draw in his breath and anger leap into his eyes. It was a little silver line on the water, and it was coming straight towards the dam where he sat. Jerry knew that it was made by someone swimming. "Ha!" said Jerry. "Now we shall see." Nearer and nearer came the silver line. Then Jerry made out the head of the swimmer. Suddenly, all the anger left Jerry. He didn't have room for anger. A great fear had crowded it out. The head was bigger than that of any muskrat Jerry had ever seen. It was bigger than the head of any of Billy Mink's relatives. It was the head of a stranger so big that Jerry felt very, very small and hoped with all his might that the stranger would not see him. Jerry held his breath as the stranger swam past and then climbed out on the dam. He looked very much like Jerry himself, only ever and ever so much bigger. And his tail! Jerry had never seen such a tail. It was very broad and flat. Suddenly, the big stranger turned and looked straight at Jerry. "Hello, Jerry Muskrat," said he. "Don't you know me?" Jerry was too frightened to speak. "I'm your big cousin from the north. I'm Paddy the Beaver, and if you leave my dam alone, I think we'll be good friends," continued the stranger. I hope so," said Jerry in a very faint voice, trying to be polite, but with his teeth chattering with fear. "Oh, tell me, you and you and you, if it mayhap you've ever heard of all that wondrous is and great, the greatest is the spoken word." It's true. It's the truest thing that ever was. If you don't believe it, you just go ask Jerry Muskrat. He'll tell you it's true, and Jerry knows. You see, it's this way. Words are more than just sounds. Oh my, yes. They are little messengers, and once they have been sent out, you can't call them back. No, sir, you can't call them back. And sometimes that is a very sad thing because, well, you see, these little messengers always carry something to someone else, and that something may be anger or hate or fear or an untruth. And it is these things which make most of the trouble in this world. Or that something may be love or sympathy or helpfulness or kindness. And it is these things which put an end to most of the troubles in this world. Just take the case of Jerry Muskrat. There he sat on the new dam which had made the strange pond in the Green Forest, shaking with fear until his teeth chattered as he watched a stranger very, very much bigger than he climb up on the dam. Jerry was afraid because he had seen that the stranger could swim as well as he could, and as Jerry had no secret burrows there, he knew that he couldn't get away from the stranger if he wanted to. Somehow Jerry knew without being told that the stranger had built the dam. And you know Jerry had twice made a hole in the dam to let the water out of the strange pond into the Laughing Brook. Jerry knew right down in his heart that if he had built that dam, he would be very, very angry with anyone who tried to spoil it. And that is just what he had tried to do. So he sat with chattering teeth, too frightened to even try to run. "I wish I had let someone else keep watch," said Jerry to himself. Then the big stranger had spoken. He had said, "Hello, Jerry Muskrat, don't you know me?" And his voice hadn't sounded the least bit angry. Then he had told Jerry that he was his big cousin, Paddy the Beaver, and he hoped that they would be friends. Now everything was just as it had been before. The strange pond, the dam, Jerry himself, and the big stranger, and the black shadows of the night. And yet, somehow, everything was different, all because a few pleasant words had been spoken. A great fear had fallen away from Jerry's heart, and in its place was a great hope that after all there wasn't to be any trouble. So he replied to Paddy the Beaver as politely as he knew how. Paddy was just as polite, and the first thing Jerry knew, instead of being enemies, as Jerry had all along made up his mind would be the case when he found the builder of the dam, here they were becoming the best of friends, all because Paddy the Beaver had said the right thing in the right way. "But you haven't told me yet what you made those holes in my dam for, Cousin Jerry," said Paddy the Beaver finally. Jerry didn't know just what to say. He was so pleased with his big new cousin that he didn't want to hurt his feelings by telling him that he didn't think that dam had any business to be across the Laughing Brook. And at the same time, he wanted Paddy to know how he had spoiled the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool. At last, he made up his mind to tell the whole story. Paddy the Beaver listened to all that his small cousin Jerry Muskrat had to tell him about the trouble which Paddy's dam had caused in the Laughing Brook and the Smiling Pool. "You see, we who live in the Smiling Pool love it dearly, and we don't want to have to leave it. But if the water cannot run down the Laughing Brook, there can be no Smiling Pool, and so we will have to move off to the Big River," concluded Jerry Muskrat. "That is why I tried to spoil your dam." There was a twinkle in the eyes of Paddy the Beaver as he replied, "Well, now that you have found out that you can't do that because I am bigger than you and can stop you, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," said Jerry Muskrat sadly. "I don't see what we can do about it. Of course you are big and strong and can do just as you please, but it doesn't seem right that we who have lived here so long should have to move and go away from all that we love so just because you, a stranger, happen to want to live here. I tell you what." Jerry's eyes sparkled as a brand new thought came to him. "Couldn't you come down and live in the Smiling Pool with us? I'm sure there is room enough." Paddy the Beaver shook his head. "Nope," said he, and Jerry's heart sank. "Nope, I can't do that because down there isn't any of the kind of food I eat. Besides, I wouldn't feel at all safe in the Smiling Pool. You see, I always live in the woods. No, I couldn't possibly come down to live in the Smiling Pool. But I'm truly sorry that I have made you so much worry, Cousin Jerry, and I'm going to prove it to you. Now you sit right here until I come back." Before Jerry realized what he was going to do, Paddy the Beaver dived into the pond, and as he disappeared, his broad tail hit the water such a slap that it made Jerry jump. Then there began a great disturbance down under water. In a few minutes, up bobbed a stick, and then another and another, and the water grew so muddy that Jerry couldn't see what was going on. Paddy was gone a long time. Jerry wondered how he could stay underwater so long without air. All the time Paddy was just fooling him. He would come up to the surface, stick his nose out, nothing more, fill his lungs with fresh air, and go down again. Suddenly, Jerry Muskrat heard a sound that made him prick up his funny little short ears and whirl about so that he could look over the other side of the dam into the Laughing Brook. What do you think that sound was? Why, it was the sound of rushing water, the sweetest sound Jerry had listened to for a long time. There was a great hole in the dam, and already the brook was beginning to laugh as the water rushed down it. "How do you like that, Cousin Jerry?" said a voice right in his ear. Paddy the Beaver had climbed up beside him, and his eyes were twinkling. It's splendid," cried Jerry. But you've spoiled your dam." "Oh, that's all right," replied Paddy. "I didn't really want it now anyway. I don't usually build dams at this time of year, and I built this one just for fun because it seemed such a nice place to build one. You see, I was traveling through here, and it seemed such a nice place that I thought I would stay a while. I didn't know anything about the Smiling Pool, you know. Now I guess I'll have to move on and find a place where I can make a pond in the fall that will not trouble other people. You see, I don't like to be troubled myself, and so I don't want to trouble other people. This green forest is a very nice place." "The very nicest place in all the world, excepting the Green Meadows and the Smiling Pool," replied Jerry promptly. "Won't you stay, Cousin Paddy? I'm sure we would all like to have you." "Of course we would," said a gruff voice right beside them. It was Grandfather Frog. Paddy the Beaver looked thoughtful. "Perhaps I will," said he, "if I can find some good hiding places in the Laughing Brook." "The Laughing Brook is merry, and so am I," cried Jerry. Grandfather Frog said he was too, and Spotty was. The others knew. The tree stood with wet feet where just a little while before had been the strange pond in the green forest, the pond made by the dam of Paddy the Beaver. In the dam was a great hole made by Paddy himself. Through the green forest rang the laughter of the laughing brook, for once more the water ran deep between its banks. And in the hearts of Grandfather Frog and Jerry Muskrat and Spotty the Turtle was laughter also, for now the Smiling Pool would smile once more, and they could go home in peace and happiness. And there was one more who laughed. Who was it? Why, Paddy the Beaver, to be sure, and his was the best laugh of all, for it was because he had brought happiness to others. "You beat me up here to the dam, but you won't beat me back to the Smiling Pool," cried Jerry Muskrat to Spotty the Turtle. Spotty laughed good-naturedly. "You'd better not stop to eat or play or sleep on the way then," said he, "for I shall keep right on going all the time. I've found that is the only way to get anywhere." "Let us all go down together," said Grandfather Frog. "We can help each other over the bad places." Jerry Muskrat laughed until he had to hold his sides at the very thought of Grandfather Frog or Spotty the Turtle being able to help him. But he is very good-natured, and so he agreed that they should all go down together. Paddy the Beaver said that he would go too, so off the four started. Jerry Muskrat and Paddy the Beaver swimming side by side, and behind them Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle. Now Spotty the Turtle is a very slow traveler on land, but in the water Spotty is not so slow. In fact, it was not long before Grandfather Frog found he was the only one who could not keep up. You see, while he is a great diver and can swim fast for a short distance, he is soon tired out. Pretty soon he was puffing and blowing and dropping farther and farther behind. By and by, Spotty the Turtle looked back. There was Grandfather Frog just tumbling head first over a little waterfall. He came up choking and gasping and kicking his long legs very feebly. Spotty climbed out on a rock and waited. He helped Grandfather Frog out beside him, and when Grandfather Frog had once more gotten his breath, what do you think Spotty did? Why, he took Grandfather Frog right on his back and started on again. Now, Jerry Muskrat and Paddy the Beaver, being great swimmers, were soon out of sight. All at once, Jerry remembered that they had agreed to go back together, and down in his heart he felt a little bit mean when he looked for Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle and could see nothing of them. So he and Paddy sat down to wait. After what seemed a long time, they saw something queer bobbing along in the water. "It's Grandfather Frog!" cried Paddy the Beaver. "No, it's Spotty the Turtle," said Jerry Muskrat. "It's both," replied Paddy, beginning to laugh. Just then Spotty tumbled over another waterfall which he hadn't seen, and of course Grandfather Frog went with him and lost his hold on Spotty's back. "I have an idea!" cried Paddy. "What is it?" asked Jerry. "Why, Grandfather Frog can ride on my flat tail," replied Paddy, "and then we'll go slow enough for Spotty to keep up with us." And so it was that just as the first moonbeams kissed the Smiling Pool, out of the Laughing Brook swam the merriest party that ever was seen. "Chug-a-rum," said Grandfather Frog. "It is good to be home, but I think I would travel often if I could have the tail of Paddy the Beaver for a boat." The fair green meadows spreading wide, the smiling pool and laughing brook, they fill our hearts with joy and pride. We love their every hidden nook. So said Jerry Muskrat as he climbed up on the big rock in the middle of the Smiling Pool with Paddy the Beaver beside him and watched the dear Smiling Pool dimpling and smiling in the moonlight as he had so often seen it before the great trouble had come. "Chug-a-rum," said Grandfather Frog in his great deep voice from the bulrushes. "One never knows how great their blessings are until they have been lost and found again." The bulrushes nodded, as if they too were thinking of this. You see, their feet were once more in the cool water. Paddy the Beaver seemed to understand just how everyone felt, and he smiled to himself as he saw how happy these new friends of his were. "It surely is a very nice place here, and I don't wonder that you couldn't bear to leave it," said he. "I'm sorry that I made you all that trouble and worry, but you see, I didn't know." "Oh, that's all right," replied Jerry Muskrat, who was now very proud of his big cousin. "I hope that now you see how nice it is, you will stay and make your home here." Paddy the Beaver looked back at the great black shadow which he knew was the Green Forest. Way over in the middle of it he heard the hunting call of Hooty the Owl. Then he looked out over the green meadows, and from way over on the far side of them sounded the bark of Reddy Fox, and it was answered by the deep voice of Bowser the Hound up in Farmer Brown's dooryard. For some reason, that last sound made Paddy the Beaver shiver a little, just as the voice of Hooty the Owl made the smaller people of the Green Forest and the Green Meadows shiver when they heard it. Paddy wasn't afraid of Hooty or of Reddy Fox, but Bowser's great voice was new to him, and somehow the very sound of it made him afraid. You see, the Green Meadows were so strange and open that he didn't feel at all at home, for he dearly loves the deepest part of the Green Forest. "No," said Paddy the Beaver, "I can't possibly live here in the Smiling Pool. It is a very nice pool, but it wouldn't do at all for me, Cousin Jerry, 'cause I wouldn't feel safe here a minute. Besides, there's nothing to eat here." "Oh, yes, there is," Jerry Muskrat interrupted. "There are lily roots and the nicest freshwater clams and—" "But there are no trees," said Paddy the Beaver, "and you know I have to have trees." Jerry stared at Paddy as if he didn't understand. Do you eat trees?" he asked finally. Paddy laughed. "Just the bark," said he, "and I have to have a great deal of it." Jerry looked as disappointed as he felt. "Of course you can't stay then," said he, and I had thought that we would have such good times together." Paddy's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps we may yet," said he. "You see, I have about made up my mind that I will stay a while along the Laughing Brook in the Green Forest, and you can come to see me there. On our way down I saw a very nice hole in the bank that I think will make me a good house for the present, and you can come up there to see me. But if I do stay, you and Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle must keep my secret. No one must know that I'm there. Will you?" "Of course we will," cried Jerry Muskrat and Grandfather Frog and Spotty the Turtle together. "Then I'll stay," said Paddy the Beaver, diving into the Smiling Pool with a great splash. And so one of Jerry Muskrat's greatest adventures ended in the finding of his biggest cousin, Paddy the Beaver.